3 years ago today, Russian forces rolled into Ukraine, escalating a war that had been going on since 2014, but turning it into a full-scale conflict that has fundamentally altered the way most of the countries of Europe view their security and their future. The very fact of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine meant that Moscow was not only willing to use force, everybody knew that, but that it was willing to use it even if the risks were pretty high, even if there were countries threatening repercussions that were pretty significant. And that made NATO and EU member states worried that even if the deterrent of NATO was still holding, it might not hold forever. What we've seen, especially in the 3 years since a full-scale war began, is military buildups. Military buildups to keep the war going. That is, countries are spending money, in Russia's case, to fight Ukraine, and in the case of the countries backing Ukraine, to help Ukraine fight Russia and to supply weapons to it. But what we're also seeing, in both Russia's case and in the case of the countries backing Ukraine, is a certain amount of preparation for a potential future war between them. That preparation is designed in the policies of both Russia and the countries backing Ukraine to deter the adversary, right? The idea isn't that you're building these forces in order to fight the war. The idea is you're building these forces so that your adversary doesn't want to go to war with you. So nuclear weapons are kind of in the background of all of this. The fear of global thermonuclear war is what has arguably kept Russia and NATO member states from getting directly engaged in fighting one another over the last 3 years and really in general. Now, I think part of the challenge here is that the Russians are very frustrated that even if the nuclear weapons have kept NATO member states from direct involvement in the war, they have not kept NATO member states from supporting Ukraine. The countries backing Ukraine have generally not believed that Russia would use a nuclear weapon under these circumstances, and even when they thought it might, what they did was they sent a very clear signal that if you do this, we will get involved. And of course, Russia is governed by these same concerns, right? It also doesn't want this large-scale escalation, but nobody knows where the real red lines are until they're crossed. I think most plausible futures for Europe are for a deterrence-based security order. And there are ways to make a deterrence-based order more stable. That involves sharing information. That involves talking to your adversaries about what makes them nervous and agreeing to limits on the things that make the other nervous. But as long as war rages in Ukraine, there's remarkably little appetite on the part of the European countries of the transatlantic coalition to talk to Russia. Meanwhile, the Russians think they don't need to talk to the European members of the transatlantic coalition. They think they need to talk to the United States, who is going to deliver everybody else to them. As of now, it looks like the U.S. president agrees with the Russians, wrong as they may be. Donald Trump's language and framing of these issues has indicated that not only is the United States likely to pull away, but that it's likely to be unpredictable in how it treats Europe, what its commitments are to Europe, how it stays involved in the NATO alliance. And he and his team are criticizing Ukraine, including by accusing it of causing the war, starting the war, which, of course, is not true, as the war was started by Russia. The Russians would like to make a deal with the Americans and have the Americans enforce it by forcing everybody else to abide by it. The Russians think that Washington calls the shots and they don't really need to talk to anybody else. The Ukrainians and the Europeans do not think this, and I believe that the Europeans have made it quite clear to the Trump administration that, nothing about us without us, but also we will not implement things that you agree to on our behalf.
Ми хочемо, але хочемо, щоб це було справедливо і а щоб ніхто за нашою спиною нічого не вирішував. І мені здається, це справедливо. Будь-яка країна має двосторонній трек з іншими країнами. Будь ласка, можете обговорювати що завгодно, але не можна приймати рішення без України, як завершити війну в Україні. Ті чи інші умови. І нас не запрошували на цю зустріч. Російсько-американську зустріч в Саудівській Аравії. Для нас це було сюрпризом, я думаю, так, як і для багатьох.
All of this has lit a bit of a fire under the European members of NATO and under the EU countries to get their act together in terms of making sure that they can support Ukraine with weapons in the near and possibly long term and support themselves in the long term. So if they really do build their own weapons without help from the Americans, if they really do start making their own decisions, if they are able to conduct military operations without U.S. enablers, they are not going to follow the U.S. line. And I think that's a tension that's existed for a very long time, but that's kind of the world that we're looking to going forward. So I think an attainable, sustainable peace has Ukraine sovereign and able to defend itself. It has European countries also capable of defending themselves and of making decisions and of acting in coordination with one another without being fully reliant on the United States. It has a United States that is still engaged in Europe, mind you, but not a United States that the countries of Europe are constantly looking to. And it has everyone at least starting to have a conversation about how to make a deterrence-based security order more stable. As of now, parts of that seem a lot likelier than others. 3 years into the full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine, the one thing that seems certain is that it's going to be a bumpy ride.